Hey guys, Pat here. Welcome to my 20 favorite films of all time list. We've looked at 20 through 14, and now we're on number 13, which would be the 1957 noir masterpiece Sweet Smell of Success, directed by Alexander McKendrick, written by Clifford Odets, who was basing this off a column or a series of columns, I can't quite remember, written by Ernest Lehman. And the character of J.J. Hunsaker was actually based off the gossip columnist Walter Winchell, who's kind of forgotten these days. He used to be super famous, but I'm not sure many young people would know that name anymore. I actually learned about him, on the internet and through movies and stuff like that. If I get any of the names wrong, I'm sorry. They're names I'm not used to saying. But this is a film I adore. I've seen this film God, 12 times, which I know other people have seen it 50 to 100 times. It's one of the most quotable movies of all time. You've probably heard dialogue from this movie and not known it was from this film. A lot of famous lines, the most famous one probably being "Match me, Sydney," or "I would hate to take a bite out of you, your cookie filled with arsenic." Let me watch me run a 50-yard dash with my legs cut off. Terrific work here. Burt Lancaster produced the movie and stars in it as JJ. And apparently, he had a lot of creative input with this. He chose the director. He had his own company and he made a lot of his own films. Always an artist, not just an actor. Burt Lancaster, wonderful career. This is probably his best performance. This or Atlantic City, which I'd also highly recommend. I believe it's from around 1980. But I don't know if there's a good quality DVD out there. I don't think it's ever been released on Blu-ray. But Sweet Smell also stars Tony Curtis as Sidney Falco. And at this point, Tony Curtis was kind of a goofy, crowd-pleasing, funny guy. He was kind of a Tom Hanks in a way, I feel. Like 80s Tom Hanks, when Bachelor Party was coming out. Or The Man with the Red Shoes, or that movie, Volunteers. He just kind of had that Tom Hanks energy, like in Money Pit, before Tom Hanks became like a serious blockbuster actor, actually. But this, for me, is Tony Curtis's best performance by far. I don't think anything competes. And that's not saying that the rest of his work isn't great. It's just this performance is so good, and this character is so good and fully realized. There's not a lot of modern films like Sweet Smell of Success. What's so interesting about it is that it pretty much takes place entirely in small interiors, restaurants, offices, apartments, or it's outside on the streets of the city. And you get these beautifully lit shots of the scenery and the interiors. The cinematographer, James Wong Howe, Chinese cinematographer, one of the legends of Hollywood. Very, very creative and clever. Apparently, this was a full-on collaboration between director, writer, actors, and the cinematographer and the sound and everything. Like there's scenes in this movie apparently where Burt Lancaster was arguing with the director, and the writer had to do rewrites, and they were doing them a lot. They were coming up with a new dialogue. And that kind of energy that gets created when you have a bunch of talented, hyper-focused people working on something that they know is good, that the original source material that they have is good, and the connections it has, and there's a lot here. There's some crazy biblical references. There's this incestuous implication. It's one of the most cynical films of all time, and as a very cynical person myself, I definitely I relate to that. I can understand that. I see a lot of myself, oddly enough, in Sidney Falco's character. I think I want to be J.J. Hunsaker, but I can't be. I'm not that quick. I'm not that towering. Burt Lancaster in this is like the scariest universal monster of all time. The way he's lit and looks, he's very intimidating. His eyes. Like I said, you can't underrate the lighting. The lighting of this film is as much part of it as the hyper real dialogue. This is one of the first films I can remember that had such stylized dialogue in this way. I mean, in a world today of David Mamet and Quentin Tarantino and Shane Black and a lot of those guys who have very distinct dialogue, where characters don't say things that sound realistic, but it's so entertaining and well written, and the word use and all that. That's how this film is. The characters really don't say realistic things, I don't think, but everything they say is so rich. I mean, the dialogue just pops. It's in my opinion, I've often argued this is in my mind just from a dialogue point of view. I'm not going to argue structure or themes. This might be the best screenplay ever written. I've seen a lot of movies, and I've never seen one where the screenplay is so immediately engaging and realized and understood, and the character so well defined. Because when I was saying a lot of movies don't have that small intimacy anymore, it really is just about the relationship between these two guys. how they're one half to each other. You know, they have to complete each other. JJ needs Sydney. Sydney needs JJ. Sydney wants to be JJ. He wants to be one of the big guys. He wants to join the elite. He wants to be up at the top. He loves gossip. He loves scheming. He loves people giving him attention. But the way Curtis plays the role and the way that it's directed and written, you like this guy. You sympathize with him as he's losing his soul, his humanity. But he really is a cookie filled with arsenic. I mean, he's really, I mean, he's acidic. He's someone you don't want to be around. He puts you in the bad mood. He makes you sweat. He's very uncomfortable. This performance is very uncomfortable, where Lancaster's performance is always in control, focused, about to burst out with just sheer, I don't know, bravura or I can't think of the words. He's so much. I mean, he's honestly cosmic in this movie. I feel like he's a god. He's larger than life. He's mythical. I don't think you can contain Hunsaker, even if you try to quote him or you watch clips from the movie or see the movie a bunch of times. You'll never fully be able to grasp the majesty of the character. But it really belongs to Falco. That's the reason this movie works so much. It is his sneaking around and getting worse as a person as it goes on. This is a scene where he tries to he doesn't try to convince a girl, he does convince her, which is a spoiler, but he convinces a girl that likes him, some cocktail waitress or something, to sleep with a guy, to prostitute herself, to help him out. So he'll write a bad article on a guy that JJ's sister is planning on running away with and marrying. A guy who's a guitar player in a jazz band. Very jazz movie. Jazz score. It looks like jazz. It just feels jazz. And mixing that with the noir, the comedic elements, it's satirical. The first part of the movie is very satirical, and as it goes on, it gets more intense and elevated, and to the point you kind of like I said, it's a very uncomfortable movie in all the right ways. Like, you're just kind of tense about what's going to happen, and the perspective never leaves these two guys. These scenes are all kind of arranged, and the movie itself constructed just to have these two going back and forth at each other. And it's a great lesson for filmmakers and artists and writers in general. You don't have to overthink your work. You know, you don't have to add... A lot of the great works of literature weren't all ambitious 1,000-page novels. Sometimes it was a very simple story that had a lot to it, had a lot of subtext. Or even beyond the subtext, it's just well told or well written. This has all of those elements. It's beautifully written. It's got subtext out the wazoo. There's so much to read into here and think about in the historical context and what it's saying about the media in general and the power that comes with that power. I mean, humanity. This goes back to basic ideas of good and evil. Except there's not really a hero in the movie, which is odd. You know, the protagonists aren't really good dudes. I guess Falco could be considered somewhat of an anti-hero by the decisions he makes throughout the movie. Particularly near the end where he does try to do the right thing and it blows up in his face. It's great. JJ just controls the room. He's telling senators off. He has cops in his pocket. Everyone's kissing his butt. He doesn't have to tip people. You know, there's so many details here that they got right. It's a film worth examining. I wish I could... I'm always worried about copyright. I'd love to go through shots and just show shots and break them down and show you all the detail they put into every moment in this film. It's really dense as a piece of filmmaking because of Howe's photography and all the tricks he does here and how he wanted it to look. So you have that with a very creative filmmaker who finds ways to change the dynamics of the scenes and the power. And then you have actors who are completely in tune with their characters and in tune with storytelling. So you just have a bunch of real... It's like a band that got together and made it the most amazing album of a genre hybrid. And something that's kind of common now in a post-world of a De Palma or Scorsese and a lot of filmmakers that ended up taking a lot of these things. You go back to Sweet Smell, and it's one of the first films that I think kind of feels fully realized with all these elements. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't films before it that were like this or films after that weren't. You know, there were. But I think this is the perfect one. In that particular sense where the writing dominates, the dialogue dominates the proceedings, drives the plot, drives the action, and the actor's body language and really just tone and use of shadows, making it like a horror film, almost like a German expressionist film, mixed with this very cynical, satirical material, which it's brilliant. The juxtaposition of those things is brilliant to where it all feels as an organic piece. You don't think about them as separate things. They all feel like one thing, and that's talent that not many films have, all those stacking layers on there. There are a few flaws here. There's a relationship, the sister and the guy who's in the band, they're not that well developed. They're kind of in the background. They're bland. They don't feel as well realized as everyone else. There's more interesting plot lines you want to follow. Some people I've heard think the ending's anticlimactic. They don't like how it wraps up. I don't agree with that. I like the ending, but I could see that maybe. JJ, his first scene, I think he says something like, "I love this dirty town." It's wonderful stuff like that. If you like pitch black stuff, if you're into dark writing, dark humor, if you like something with a little bit of bite, then I highly recommend this. But if you're just a fan of cinema, if you're cinephile, if you just like movies basically and what people do, and you want to see a great movie, it's worth watching. You owe it to yourself to see this movie, like seeing 12 Angry Men. The director, though, he's probably most famous. Before this, he did The Lady Killers, the original one, not the Coen Brothers movie, obviously. And he's kind of a comedy director, but he brings that energy and sensibility to comedy to the material here, and that's what I think really works. It's kind of like that balance between horror and comedy. It's all about tone and intimacy. He brings that intimacy that you need for humor to work, and he brings that to just this dirty underground world of politics and sex and scheming and lies, and it makes you question your own morality while it explores the morality of these characters. And you're asking, maybe they don't have a soul, maybe it is just an illusion. The rules that we all live by, and the status that we give ourselves, and it's interesting. JJ, he somehow has his own logic. He thinks he's defending his readers. He thinks that he's speaking for the everyday American, that he represents all of them, him as the individual. While Sidney's almost more selfish in what he wants. It feels like he just wants to be liked and be ahead, and not just be some, I don't know, bummy loser guy that's only really getting by because he's good looking. And once the looks fade away, is he really going to have anything? Just terrific. It's one of my favorite movies because it's entertaining to watch, and there's so much to talk about with it, and the making of the film's as interesting as the film that exists. But that's a lot of movies. There's just a particular thing about this film, the pacing, for instance. This movie's only like 95 minutes. Most movies that I love, or I think a lot of people love, a lot of them are 2 hours or under 2 hours, right below there, or 3 hours. For myself personally, I notice that I like long movies, but there is something to the 3-act structure, 90-minute movie when you execute it just well. And I can't think of this movie really being longer. I wouldn't have minded that. Or shorter. It's kind of perfect. Like, they figured it all out. They got all the rough edges off and everything like that. The makeup, the costume design, all that stuff goes without saying is absolutely terrific. But it is the meat of the film. It's that those two guys arguing or having banter back and forth, disagreeing, but needing each other, feeding off each other. That JJ, as the king of the hill, he needs this little jester, this little clown of his. He needs him to really learn about kind of everything because he has so many sources. But of course, Sidney needs JJ. It's a weird dynamic. It's a weird power relationship, and I haven't seen many movies capture it quite as well. And I recommend the work of the director. I think he's an underrated director. He didn't make a lot of films after this. He worked on another film with Burt Lancaster, but was fired. And then I think he made a couple more movies. Tony Curtis went on to make a lot of great movies, so did Burt Lancaster. But in a lot of ways, this is that film where you see where they went from just commercial prospects, where people saw them one way, into truly serious, great actors and auteurs of their craft in a way where they were coming up with new techniques in the cinematic form. I feel like these are very original performances. In particular, Tony, I think, kind of created a type that we've seen, and you see these two types battling each other in this film, trying to get one of them's trying to get something, an edge, and JJ has all of the cards, and Sidney maybe has two because he took a couple out of JJ's pocket. A lot of people think this is one of the best films of all time. You hear this from film critics, you'll hear it from writers, journalists, comedians love this movie. Comedians love movies with sharp dialogue. So a lot of people love it, but yet it still feels underrated. It doesn't feel like it's known by even on IMDb. It's got 21,000 votes. It's not a lot, and it's got an 8.2. It feels like a movie that, you just say to everyone, and they're like, yeah, of course, Sweet Smell of Success. Everyone should know that flick. But like I said, it's one of those films that's influenced so much, and you may know a lot about it, and you've never seen it. It's one of those movies you don't realize how many people that make stuff you do love this movie originally. It could work in so many facets. It could be a novel, it could be a play, it could be this film. I think it works great in the cinematic medium because of the close-ups and the way that you can, really focus in on the actors and their facial expressions and all that. It really helps create a sense of tone and you thinking about what's in their heads when things are going on. I don't really know what to say. It's kind of a film where I don't have much to criticize or much to give an analysis on because it's so clear what it is. It's a fully realized work. There are essays on it and people giving you breakdowns. I've heard comparisons to The Great Gatsby. There's a lot of really interesting. Roger Ebert has a great review of this movie. Actually, there's a lot of great analysis and people looking at it. But I think it's just an immediate pleasure. I think as soon as you see it, you realize it's great. I don't think it needs to be explained to you. Like I said, it all feels organic as one thing, and that's truly what the power of cinema can be: is the magic, the illusion of something greater than reality. That we're just cameras and people talking and speech, but using all of those things, the dialogue and the sound, how you hear, the sensory things, your vision, all of those things, using them together. When movies are great, they take all of those things and truly do something that cuts deep down into your soul. And part of my soul, of course, a piece of it, will always belong to Sweet Smell of Success, one of the true masterworks, and just great movies, one of the great noirs, one of the great satires, one of the great dramas, one of the great character studies in a lot of ways. It may seem a little shallow and cold at first. I could get that feeling maybe. It's a very cold movie at points, but I find that what's so great about it. It really evokes the feeling you see when you see someone smoking a cigarette and you see that smoke come out, and you see that that old iconic movie idea of smoking the cigarette and all that, and that feeling and the black and white and the calmness there and on them in the shadow. It has all of that feeling you get, what you love about old movies and what we love about movies within the genre. But to me it also crazily it feels so modern. This movie feels like I mean, these performances aren't dated, the pacing's not dated, nothing about it's really dated. It's timeless and yet so much a product of the era that it was made in. Great work. Anyway, that's my 13th favorite film of all time. Easily could have cracked the top 10. I'm kind of regretting not putting it in the top 10, but if you haven't seen it, I couldn't give a higher recommendation. So, Sweet Smell of Success. Thank you for listening. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Integrity. Acute. Like indigestion.
What does this mean? Integrity.
A pocket full of firecrackers. Waiting for a match.